got caught up with some of my work. So one of the most common things that I see where there's problems with people who live together, and at this day and age, it's the young, the middle-aged, and the old, is they don't really sit down and work out the arrangements as it relates to what and how is the property that they had before the relationship handled, and what about those things that you buy as a couple during the period of time you're together. The need for a cohabitation agreement is really essential if you want to have at least an understanding of the meeting of the minds as to what the intents are of the party as it relates to property they own prior to moving in together, during that period of time, and after they leave if there's a termination of the agreement. So let's go for some basics. Let's just go to community property real quick. If you're married, well, it's presumed everything acquired during marriage is community property. However, there's some exceptions to that. If you inherit something, that's separate property. If you are in an automobile accident, and I've done personal injury for many, many years, that is a separate property recovery. If you take those monies and put them into a community account after you get it, then you've gifted it to the community. And then what we call transmutation, it goes to the community. Second, Nevada does not recognize common law marriage. In the old days, years ago, if you'd introduce somebody, this is my husband, this is my wife, you held out that way to the public, that could create a common law marriage. Those days are over many, many years ago. So Nevada does not, and most states, by the way, don't recognize common law marriage because there was just too many legal problems with that. Obviously, as it relates to the state of Nevada and most states, when you live together, heterosexual or otherwise, same-sex, civil unions, basically you have rights. You create this contract, this cohabitation agreement, and you list out your assets. It's almost like a quasi prenuptial agreement, if you will, where you lay out all the properties and assets and liabilities and what you intend, but it's called a cohabitation agreement. And so you sit down, and some people will come to me and say, well, Bob, I don't have any assets, but my partner does have assets. I say, well, it's irrelevant to me that you don't have any assets at this point. What's relevant to me is as you start living together and you acquire assets, how they're going to be handled. So that's why you need to have a cohabitation agreement. It is a hell of a lot cheaper, guys, to get a cohabitation agreement done correctly by a lawyer before you go into the relationship than not have anything in writing and then walk away from the relationship. And that's where it becomes very expensive for you when it comes to legal fees and involvement, because you're essentially going to be asking a mediator, an arbiter, or a judge to decide without any type of written agreement as to what was in both of your minds when you bought certain things, furniture, cars, different things like that, went into business together. What was the real intent? Now, obviously, courts could look to other circumstances. They could look to tax returns. They could look to receipts. They could look to see if the property you bought together is in both names on the house. Obviously, that goes to intent of the parties. But most importantly, if you know and if you're truly in love with this person and you don't want to enter into matrimony, then get this agreement. It's cost effective. It is legally enforceable if there's a breach, as long as it's done correctly. Generally, when I do a cohabitation agreement, I have the other party that's not in with the consultation go get their own lawyer, because that's very important. They could waive the right to a lawyer, but I think it's always important that both parties have a lawyer to advise them. We draw up a draft of the agreement. You look at it, you show it to your partner, have their lawyer look at it, come to an agreement, you sign off on it, and you're done. You don't have to record it at the recorder's office. You don't have to really show it to anybody else. It's just between you guys. Now, one of the most common mistakes that I see on both genders is you fall in love, you don't get a cohabitation agreement. One of the two owns a house before you cohabitate, and you put that other person's name on the deed once you move in together with the understanding both are going to make the mortgage payment. Well, understand that when you do that, you've taken that separate property asset, if you will, and you now have put that other party's name on it, and they're not responsible under the loan. And if the relationship goes bad, how are you going to get that person off? Because you're the one on the mortgage. And that becomes basically an extortion, because usually the person that leaves or breaks up, they extort that person who's on the mortgage originally for money. So that's why it's very important that if you have the cohabitation agreement, and even if you have something together, you put in there what's the intent. There's going to be a buyout. There's going to be an appraisal put on the property. You buy that person out with a certain amount of days. There could be contribution provisions in there as to how much money you put into the house during that period of time. If you loaned any of your own money to do a home improvement, that you're entitled to that when you leave. These are things that are talked about when you have a cohabitation agreement that you want to put together if you're going to live together. The moral of the story is, don't leave it to mystery. Don't leave it to a third party to try to figure out what's inside your head. Put it in writing. Please don't go do it on your own, and please don't go to websites and do it. Honest to God, I don't get it, why people do that. It just doesn't make sense to me. You're paying for legal advice, okay? Now, a couple other things. Massi.com, I do a lot of legal consultations, as does my son Robert. We now do online consultations. So you go to Massi.com, it has online consultations, and it's a PayPal situation, and we limit 3 questions on the same subject, hopefully, and then we respond to you within 24, 48 hours. We're putting up a lot of blogs now that's being posted. I'm going to start doing podcasts, as is my son Robert. So let people know this subject today. I think you should try to share it with people, because it's more of a problem than ever before, because more people are living together, generations. Interesting enough, I read an article the other day, and this is a good thing to me, and I have no opinion either way. If people live together, don't live together, it's none of my business, and I don't care. But young couples are going back to the basics of being married, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing if you're going to have a family, but again, legally, it makes no difference to me. If you're going to get married and you have assets, do a prenup. If you're just going to live together, do a cohabitation agreement. This is Bob Massi. Usually on Mondays. Today it's Tuesday. Our office number is 702-870-1100. I'll see you next week.